Good morning. Today we're doing another study in the book of Daniel. We're in the 10th chapter today, and it's a chapter that is actually an introduction into what's going to be told to Daniel in the vision, his fourth vision, and what is going to be told to Daniel is in the 11th and the 12th chapter, which we'll cover the next 2 weeks. But chapter 10 is an intro, and it talks primarily more about the ones that is bringing the message than it is the message itself. So I hope you've had a good week, and I look forward to winding up the next 2 or 3 weeks now with the book of Daniel, and I hope that it's been an encouragement and some insightful thoughts for you as we go. Let's begin with a prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for this week and the things that we've struggled with in our lives, and the things that have come our way, and the things you have blessed us with. We give you thanks for the way you care for us, and we ask that you continue to do that. Help us to always be mindful of your presence. Help us, even after our lesson today, to realize even more the fact that there's something going on behind the scenes that we can't see, but we know that you're there and that you want the best for us. We ask for your blessings on our country, on this world, especially in this troubled time with the things that are going on, the conflicts and the virus and things like that. Bless us according to your will, and help us to always look to you for guidance, for comfort, and to depend upon you in our lives. We ask your blessings on this lesson in Christ's name. Amen. So, as I said, chapter 10 is a preliminary. It's an introduction to the next 2 chapters. And as you'll see, it is a chapter that really has a couple of things in mind. Number one, we're going to see some activity of some holy angels and going on behind the scene that you wouldn't normally know about. In fact, you wouldn't know about if it hadn't been revealed to Daniel. And so we'll see about that. And we also see just how much God cares for his people in our lesson today. It starts out in the first verse of chapter 10. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, I want you to remember that phrase now, the 3rd year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. And the message was true and one of great conflict. You've probably noticed every chapter in the book of Daniel has had conflict associated with it in one way or another. And it says that, but that he understood the message and had an understanding of the vision. Well, this is something new, because in the past, when the vision was over, he would say, I was still perplexed and I didn't understand it, and there was no one to reveal it to me. Now he's going to have a different level of understanding as a result of the next 3 chapters. Here is the chart that I've shown before. Top right-hand 2 corners there with Darius the Medes and Cyrus the Great. And today we're in the last blue box there, Daniel's 4th vision, contained in the last 3 chapters of his book. And Daniel has been now a captive Israelite in the land of the Babylonians now for 65 plus years. At the end of that, well, the Medes and the Persians come in, they take over, and now Daniel is living his life, still anticipating the full return of the 70 years that was promised to go back to Israel. And it's on his heart, it's still on his mind. And we read here, in the 1st year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of Median descent, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans. That's what we read last week in the 9th chapter. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, who was made king. Well, who made Darius the king? Well, bottom left-hand corner, Cyrus actually conquered the Medes back in 550 BC, which was back probably 11 years earlier than what we're reading about as far as the takeover of Babylon. And so that happened around 550 BC. They didn't take over Babylon until 539, a date that's pretty well established. And so when Darius took over, he was actually under the regime of Cyrus at that time, and it was Cyrus who made him king over the Chaldeans at that point. And so we have now, up at the top right-hand corner, I've listed Cyrus as the king that existed over everything during this time period that we're talking about. That means that the verse that we first read, that the vision we're going to see happened in the 3rd year of the reign of Cyrus, that means that happened actually back about the same time that the lion's den occurred, after Daniel's 3rd vision that he had. And so all of this happened pretty much at the early stages of the Persian and the Medes takeover of Babylon, and now they controlled people like Daniel, who was captive there. So continuing on in Daniel 2, it says, "In those days I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 entire weeks." He had been in mourning. Now you remember last week he was preparing for prayer, and we talked about how he really got dressed for prayer with sackcloth and fasting and with ashes. And so now he is in mourning, and he's been doing this now for 3 weeks. He said, "I did not eat any tasty food." The King James, "I didn't eat any pleasant food." I didn't eat any food that had a delight to it. It didn't mean that he wasn't eating. It was just not the preferred food or the tasty food. And he said, "I didn't eat that kind of food, nor did I eat meat or wine, or did wine enter my mouth." When we first read about Daniel in chapter 1, when he pushes back against the choice food that the king was going to serve him, that he said, "Just give us vegetables and give us water." Well, you might think that Daniel was a vegetarian. Well, here it says, "I didn't eat any meat and I didn't drink any wine during this 3-week period," but it says, "Nor did I use any ointment at all until the entire 3 weeks were completed." So he's not on a total fast here, but he is staying separate from these kind of foods at this point in time for this 3-week period. And so he didn't have meat, didn't have wine, and he didn't have any ointment on his hair. No Dapper Dan, no Butch Wax, no Crew products, and he didn't use any Old Spice. So none of that, things that we might know today. He was basically almost like he was in last week's lesson, and that is he was dressed as a beggar last week, and this time he has the humility of a mourner, and that is he's barely eating, and he is in just constant sorrow of the things that are going on. Now, why do you think Daniel had been in mourning? What was his struggle? What was causing him to feel the way that he did? Well, if we look back over the things that has concerned him in the past, the things that have concerned him in the past, number one was the restoration of God's name. He said, "In the past, you, God, your name has been great, but now, because of our actions, they don't regard you with the same regard that they have in the past." And he's also concerned about the rebuilding of Jerusalem, and it's been in shambles now for the last 65, almost 70 years, probably 70 years at this point. And the rebuilding of the temple and the feast is something that's constantly on his mind. And God doesn't need to have, Daniel wants him to reinstate Israel in God's sight. And so all of these things have been the things that Daniel has prayed for in the past. And he's also prayed for the meaning of the visions. He said, after I would see some of these past visions, I still didn't understand, and there was no one to explain it to him, and so he would think about it. And while we read it from one chapter to the next, from 1 week to the next, in actuality, there has been 1 and 2 years have passed during this time frame. And there might be one more reason because of that as well. And it's contained, I think, here in the next verse. It says, on the 24th day of the first month, while I was by the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris. Now, Daniel normally lives in Babylon. And Babylon is on the Euphrates River. And the Tigris River, or the Hydekel, as another word is used for Tigris, is a river that is about 50 to 60 miles east of the Euphrates, east of where Babylon is. And that's where we find Daniel today. I don't know. We're going to see that he has some companions with him. And he has been a great help to Darius, as we're going to find out specifically in next week's lesson. He's been a tremendous asset to this new regime. And so he may be on a business trip. And he may have some other people there with him who are with him on this business trip. Anyway, for whatever reason, he is 50, 60 miles from home. He's beside this river, the Tigris. And the other thing that really stands out in this verse is the 24th day of the first month. This is the month of Nisan. And it's the very month that the Passover was held. Since he has been concerned about the temple, the sanctuary, about all the different feasts, and this would be the very month when this would be happening. And it's not happening, and it hasn't happened for decades now. And so this has to be another thing that's on his mind, that he would be doing something entirely different. In fact, if he were even back in Babylon, he would probably be doing something to at least remember the Passover in some special way. But here he is now with these companions doing something, and it's just completely foreign to him, and he is in mourning because of all these things. And so that's the significance of that month. Then in verse 5, he says, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, there was a certain man. Now, that's all he says about this individual. There was a certain man dressed in linen. Now, linen was the dress material for kings, for the high priest, for all the priests and the things that they had going on. It was a special garment for nobility, and whose waist was girded with a belt of pure gold, of Upaz. And I looked up Upaz, and it looks like that several places in the Bible it's referred to as a very special gold from a very unique place. A couple of possibilities. One was in Africa, another was in Arabia. I'm not sure that anybody really knows, but all I know is that the gold was special, and it was pure gold. His body was also like beryl, and that is a mineral that has a yellow, green, blue tint to it. It's a mineral that gemstones were made out of, a very beautiful mineral. And his body was like beryl, his face and the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like flaming torches, his arms and feet like the gleam of polished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a tumult. And he just calls this individual a certain man. So we say, who was that? Who was that? If we look at the book of Revelation, first chapter, listen to these words. I saw one like a son of man, clothed in a robe reaching to the feet, girded across his chest with a golden sash. His head and his hair were white like wool, like snow, and his eyes were like a flame of fire, and his feet were like burnished bronze. And when it was made to glow in the furnace, and his voice was like the sound of many waters. Well, we know from Revelation that is indeed Jesus, the Son of God. Daniel does not call him that. He calls him a certain man. And so this certain man could be Jesus, could be a high angel. I'm going to put that on hold for a moment because there's some more information that we can look at in just a minute, and then I'll let you decide. So here are a couple of possibilities of who this Son of Man, this certain man is. It says, "Now I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, while the men who were with me did not see the vision." Now, does that sound like something that had happened sometime earlier or later, actually? Would happen in the future that we know about. It sounds like the Apostle Paul and his conversion from Saul to Paul when he became a Christian on the road to Damascus, because the people that were with him at that time, they heard a sound, but they didn't understand the meaning and they didn't know what happened. And so these people right here, they didn't see the vision, even though Daniel did. It said, "Nevertheless, a great dread fell on them." They heard or saw something that made them feel very dreadful. And they ran away to hide themselves. They wanted nothing to do with that. And so a great dread falls on them. Maybe they didn't see the vision. Maybe they heard something, or maybe they just saw Daniel fall to the ground. There was something about it that scared them, so they left. "So I was left alone and saw this great vision, yet no strength was left in me, for my natural color turned to a deathly pallor." Turns out to be pale is something that Daniel's done before in one of his other visions. And he said, "I retained no strength, but I heard the sound of his words. And as soon as I heard the sound of his words, I fell into a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground." And that's not something that's uncommon to Daniel. He had done that once before. And then the next verse in chapter 10 says this, "I, Daniel, fell trembling on his hands and knees, on my hands and knees," Daniel says. Have you noticed the many emotions of Daniel in our study so far? It's really amazing, the different kinds of things that Daniel has, that he's witnessed that have affected him and his emotions. When we first see him in the first chapter, he's a young man, probably a teenager, and when he is served the king's food, he pushes back and he said, "I don't want to eat that because it's a food that would defile me according to my Hebrew training." And it said he made up his mind. So we see him being very resolute, very strong here. The next chapter was the great vision, and the king had made an edict, said, "If somebody can't tell me the vision and what it means, I'm going to kill all the wise men." So Daniel is under a threat of death, and he goes, talks to the three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he said, "We need to pray for an answer to the king's dream," and it says he requested compassion. Now, if your life was on the line for an answer from God, I have a feeling there would be a very, very intense prayer that he would have, and that's in chapter 2. And then, as soon as he is given the answer to his request and to Nebuchadnezzar's dream, very confidently he says, "Take me to the king. I know the answer. Take me to the king." So we see him very strong and very confident at this point. And then in chapter 4, with the vision of the big tree about Nebuchadnezzar, it says the thoughts alarmed him. Right after the lion's den, chapter 6, he was given a lot of praise and responsibility, and it said he enjoyed success. So he enjoyed the things that were going on at that time around him. His spirit was distressed and alarmed, and this is in chapter 7. This is the 4 beasts that come up out of the sea. His thoughts were alarming, it says twice, and once his face grew pale. Then in chapter 8, he sought to understand the vision of the ram and the goat. You remember those. We'll talk some more about them in a minute. He was frightened. He fell on his face to the ground. A deep sleep came to him. He was exhausted and sick for days, and he was astounded and confused by the vision, and all that's in chapter 8. And so, as we turn to chapter 9, he is fasting, sackcloth, ashes, the life of a beggar here. And it says in 9:21, he had extreme weakness. So, Travis, I ask you, if you were going to try to guess what picture I might put up to describe Daniel's emotions, what would you think it would be? Exactly. A roller coaster ride. He is high, he is low, he's up, he's down, moments of success, extreme weakness on the other side. He's all over the map. And so this has characterized Daniel's life up to this point in time, from a time he was a teenager now to when he's about 80 years old. Ups and downs. Sometimes we wonder, has anybody been through all the things that we've been through in our lives? Daniel's one who certainly had some very highs and some very lows. So this certain man tells Daniel, "O Daniel, man of high esteem." This is the second time this phrase is used, and it'll be used yet one other time in this book. "O Daniel, man of high esteem, understand the words that I'm about to tell you, and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you." I wonder who sent this person. If it's Jesus, it would probably be God. It would be God. If it were an angel, it would be either God the Father, the Almighty, or Jesus himself. We'll hold that thought. And when he had spoken this word to me, Daniel says, I stood up trembling. So he's still fearful. Then he said to me, this is the certain man now talking to Daniel, "Don't be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day when you set your heart on understanding this and on humbling yourself before God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words." I wonder when the first day that you set your heart on understanding. Well, Daniel has certainly been perplexed in chapter 7, 8, and 9. Let's see what happens here. At the end of chapter 8, Daniel said, I was exhausted, sick for days. Then I got up again, carried on the king's business, and that's what we see him doing now in this particular chapter. But I was astounded at the vision, and there was none to explain it. Well, what all has he seen? Well, he's seen the 4 beasts that came up out of the sea in chapter 7. Then as we turn to chapter 8, the focus is on the second and the third beast, the bear and the 4-headed leopard that was there. But now they're a ram and a goat. And chapter 8 is a more clear definition of what he saw in chapter 7, because it says the ram represents the kings of Media and Persia. And turns out we know who at least 2 of those kings were, because that's Darius and Cyrus. And so it specifically points to them as to the kings. And then the shaggy goat represents Greece, and it says that the horn between his eyes is the first king, and we know that that's Alexander the Great. And then from also chapter 8, We see how the horn was broken off. Four kingdoms, his kingdom was split into four different quadrants at that point in time. And then finally, one of them, the Babylonian and Syrian kingdom, an individual came and just really caused havoc. And it was Antiochus that did that. You remember that from chapter 8. And so all of these things have been weighing on Daniel's mind. He said there was none to explain it. He's been thinking about it, and he's probably been thinking about it for a year or two. And this certain man comes and he says, I have come in response to your words. He said, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. How long's Daniel been praying? 3 weeks. And he said, I would have come, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 3 weeks, for 21 days. I would have come sooner, but I had something going on someplace else and I couldn't get here. Who is this prince, the kingdom of Persia? Well, let's see what the rest of the verse says. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes. Well, we know who Michael is, and that he's an archangel, right? And if they're referring to the prince and chief princes and refer to them as the one who is causing some of this vision to come true, turns out maybe this prince of the kingdom of Persia, maybe that is a messenger of Satan, just like Michael is a messenger of God. Well, here is somebody that Michael is working against, trying to accomplish God's will, and maybe it is a messenger of Satan, or it might also be the king himself. You'll find both of those possibilities in the various commentaries. And so Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. Well, if this certain man who is talking, and he said, Michael came to help me, if we say that this certain man is Jesus, we need to ask ourselves, does Jesus ever need any help? I mean, here is the one who spoke the worlds into existence. Does he need any help? Did he need for Michael to come help him? Well, we know that sometimes he doesn't need help, but he can get it. When he was before Pilate, he said, don't you know that I could call my father and he could send 12 legions, 72,000 angels at my disposal? And so sometimes people come to help, to assist, and so it still could be Jesus that this certain man is. But he said, but I had been left there with the kings of Persia. Now, do you just leave Jesus somewhere? That doesn't really seem to fit, does it? It seems like the only people that I know that could leave Jesus somewhere and not be in serious trouble was Mary and Joseph when they left him in Jerusalem, and they lost him for a full day. They lost God's son for a whole day and didn't even know it. We need to call Child Protective Services on this. And so here we have Michael coming to help this certain man, and because this certain man had been left there with the kings of Persia, doing business, trying to accomplish what God wanted to have done. And he says, now I have come to you in understanding of what has happened. So he's been detained for 3 weeks. Now he comes to Daniel. I have come to you to give you an understanding of what will happen to your people. Now, usually when the people of Israel were talked about, either by God or by one of the prophets, when God talked about them, he said, my people. There were a couple of times when he said, like to Moses, when the Israelites, one of their rebellions, God said, your people, they're out of line. And Moses turns around and says, they're your people. It was one of those kind of things. But most of the time, over 200 times in the Bible, when God speaks of the people of Israel and the things that he's doing for them, he calls them my people. And so here in this verse, it says, now I have come to give you an understanding of what will happen to your people, Daniel, in the latter days, for the vision pertains to the days yet future. We need to be reminded of the activities of angels. In the Hebrews chapter number 1, it says, they, speaking of angels, are they not all ministering spirits sent out to render service for the sake of those who will inherit salvation? What we're doing and seeing now in this chapter is a glimpse of things that are going on behind the scenes that humans just don't get insight to unless God explains it to them. And so we have the angels and the struggle that's going on with the kings and the princes of Persia, and it's a struggle that Daniel was not aware of. He didn't know what was going on there, but this certain man is now explaining to Daniel. Also, I want to remind you of this, that something is going on behind the scene. And there was a time in the Old Testament, in 2 Kings, when Elisha and his servant were surrounded by the king of Aram and all of his chariots. And the servant looked out, he sees the opposing army, and says to Elisha, so what do we do now? And as a result of that, Elisha prays to God, and he said, God, open his eyes so he can really see what's happening. Then he says to his servant, there are more of them, there are more of these people that you're about to see than those that are against us. And sure enough, the servant's eyes were open and are surrounding the whole area were chariots of fire and horses, far greater than the ones of the enemy out front. So in our lives, there are things going on behind the scenes that we have no insight to. Sometimes we get a glimpse of it later on in our life as we look back, but probably we're going to be most surprised when it's all over and we see what really happened upon this earth and how God was involved in so many things that was just not obvious at the moment. So, also, when dealing with the human race, these angels have to contend with the time of the humans. So this certain man was dealing with the king or the prince of Persia, and he did that for 3 weeks. Then he came to Daniel, and turns out he's going to turn around and go back, and because there's still work to be done there. And so when these spirits that are not bound by time and things like that start dealing with us, all of a sudden they have to be constrained by human times. And it's the same with Jesus. Here's Jesus. He steps out of eternity into our life and is now for 33 years constrained by the times and the events of the things going on with us humans. And so that's what angels do on our behalf. That's what God does on our behalf. And then it's back to the spirit world. Okay, when he had spoken to me, according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. Again, another strong emotion by Daniel. And behold, one who resembled a human being was touching my lips. This is a certain man again. Then I opened my mouth and spoke and said to him who was standing before me, listen to these words, O my Lord, as a result of the vision, anguish has come upon me, and I have retained no strength. what he had just seen and the things that has just been said to him has just made him speechless, and he is without strength. And he says, how can such a servant of my Lord talk with such as my Lord? How can I even deal with you? You're so much greater. You're so much more magnificent than I am. He is in mourning. Here is this bright angel who's girded in brilliance. And he said, how can I even talk with you? He said, as for me, there remains now no strength, nor has any breath been left in me. And Daniel is just exhausted from all of this. In the book of Hebrews, this is what the cross will do. This is what the sacrifice of the Christ will do. And that is, we no longer have to feel ashamed and distraught at the presence of the Almighty. We still have our reverence, still have the worship to Him, but there's something that's different. Listen to this. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence. To draw near, that means to go toward, not to run away from. Let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. It's kind of like what Daniel's going through. Now here is Daniel. He is just exhausted. And the certain man says, you're highly esteemed. To us, God says, for I so loved the world that I gave my son. And the concept is still the same for Daniel as for us. And also notice this verse. Now, little children, abide in him so that when he appears, we may have confidence. We don't have to run and hide. We may have confidence and not shrink away from him in shame at his coming. That's what the cross did. It gives us the ability to humbly be before God and to have a confidence that he is there for us and we don't have to be ashamed. Then this one with human appearance touched me again and strengthened me. And he said, O man of high esteem, third time, do not be afraid. Peace be with you. Take courage and be courageous. Now, as soon as he spoke to me, I received strength and said, May my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, Do you understand why I came to you? Daniel, do you understand why I left 3 weeks of where I was and now I've come to you to talk with you? He said, do you understand? He said, but I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. I've got my 3 weeks there. I didn't finish what needed to be done, so I've got to go back. And so I'm going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. So this is the picture of the ram, and the goat. This is the transition from Persia and the Medes to the Grecian realm. The prince of Greece is about to come. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. So right before I leave to go back to work on that problem, I've got something I want to tell you, and that's what's going to be now in the next chapter, in chapter 11. Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me. Now, if this was Jesus, would it be the fact that nobody is standing with Jesus? Maybe nobody needs to. I don't know. It's just, you can see why different commentators and different people down through the years have struggled with trying to put an exact name on who this might be. I'll let you work on that. Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael, your prince. And just like any good saga, just like any good mystery, just like any good vision that you don't know, when it gets right down to the very good part, you know what appears to be continued, because now it goes to chapter 11, and that's next week. And so, let's see what we've seen in this chapter. As an older man, Daniel, in his 80s, Daniel is still busy for the Lord and trying to learn his ways. He is busy, he's involved, and even if he's on a business trip, he's thinking about things that are greater than just what's going on in this kingdom before he's living on this earth. And his emotions reveal deep involvement. These things really bothered Daniel. And his life had been a roller coaster of up and down, lion's den to being number one in the kingdom. It's just all over the place. And his emotions show just how deeply involved he was in everything that he did. And we see also that the messenger seems to be as awesome as the message itself. When this certain man would appear, when Gabriel would appear to Daniel, all these people were so magnificent that the messenger himself was so significant, which says to us today that it's not just what we say or what we do, but it's who we are. Something good to think about. And finally, God has things going on behind the scenes. He did for Daniel. He does for everybody. He always has. He had something going on behind the scenes for Joseph when he was in the well and about to be sold down into Egypt. There was a bigger picture going on. Nobody could see it at the time. And that's true then. It's still true today. Things going on in our lives. Angels have been sent as ministering spirits to those who inherit salvation. So that's a summary of what I see in Daniel, the 10th chapter. Next week we'll pick up the details of the vision that this certain man is about to give before he goes back now and deals with the prince of Persia, and then finally later on the prince of Egypt, of Greece. So that's it for today. May you have a great week. Thank you.